Okay, it looks like we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome. So excited to be continuing our countdown to the 19th annual Church Lawn Leadership Summit. Yay! And today we have the privilege of having with us for our summit preview the very first keynote speaker for day one. So I'm excited to welcome Michael Martin, president of ECFA. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, Rika. Hey, everyone. It's great to be with you. I like this little preview of the conference. I've been to several of the 19, but I don't remember us ever doing a stream like this before. So this is fun.
But that's because we just got the great idea this year and we're running with it. So I'm glad that we've been able to preview several speakers, but it's fun to have you today. So before we jump into our conversation, I just want to take a moment to recognize ECFA for being a sponsor of the Church Law and Leadership Summit. And as you kind of alluded to, ECFA has been a supporter of the event for several years, and we're just incredibly grateful for your continued partnership and your commitments to equipping churches and church-centered organizations. So thank you so much for your support as a sponsor, and we are excited that you're also a speaker this year.
Well, as you know, we're honored. We really are. And I know for myself personally, there's so much that I gain from participating and being a part of the conference. So anyway, it feels like it's just such a great investment, and we're so honored to be able to support.
Well, thank you. And I want to say, Michael brings an incredible perspective to the financial realities facing churches today. Whenever we talk with churches, whenever we have our webinars within our membership, one of the things that comes up all the time, of course, is finances related to church. And so I'm really glad that you're able to, as president of ECFA, and as an attorney and a CPA, you have a unique vantage point into what's happening across the worlds of nonprofits and the church landscape. So I'm excited that your keynote for this year's summit is titled The Financially Resilient Church: Three Questions Every Leader Should Ask. I love that title, and I think this topic could not be more timely because, as you know, churches are navigating changes and giving patterns and rising costs, just in the inflationary environment, shifting demographics, and changing expectations around financial stewardship. But rather than simply asking, how do we deal with these challenges, Michael is going to help leaders step back and ask three really important questions. Can you tell us what those questions are, Michael?
Yeah, of course. And I'll say I love the theme of resilience and like
Mm.
focusing on being built to last. I think and you kind of hinted at this even in the title of the presentation, but I think when it comes to resilience, like you have me asking a lot of questions. So that's kind of how we got here. Just being honest, I'm asking a lot of questions. I'm leaning into this. The three questions are: what is changing? What is driving the change? And then also, how should we respond to it? And I think when it comes to data, we're really good a lot of times at looking at it and saying, okay, what's happening? And like, you can find so many statistics. You can find these are percentages, these are changes, this is what's happening. And I feel like a lot of times that seems to dominate the news. So we're really good at that. And then as I think about it, we're also pretty good at saying, okay, how should we respond to data? We come up with theories, we kind of run. Sometimes I'll say we might even react sometimes. But that's why I think that second question is so critical, which is what is driving the change? Why are we seeing some of the trends that we are? Because then that should really inform how we respond to them. And that's just key to the whole idea of resilience.
So very good. I love those questions. I'm a bit of a bookworm and I always am reading a book of some sort. And one of the books that I just got into talks about how when we're younger, so as kids, he speaks to like people all over the world, including like Microsoft and big groups, but he also speaks to like school age kids. And he talks about
Mm.
like when he does these big assemblies, they like break them down. And so he first sees like the kindergarten to like second grade, and they're like coming in and they're like raising their hands and they've got all the questions, right? But then as you get to like the older kids, you get to the high schoolers, like everybody has their heads down, they're looking at their phone, they're not really paying attention, right? But this need to ask good questions is such a critical component for life, I think, but certainly within churches. So I'm curious to ask, how did you come up with those three questions, and why do you believe that every church leader needs to be asking them now?
Yeah, I love that you use the word that you're curious, because as you were just talking about that example of even as we are kids, right? Like there's so much natural curiosity that God builds into us. And then what is it that like over the course of life, we kind of lose curiosity? But I think when it comes to resilience too, that curiosity is really important, because as I've been thinking, and I told you, you really got me thinking about this resilience theme, because when it comes to resilience, I think it runs really deep, right? Like true resilience comes from depth and not just, okay, we're scratching the surface, we're kind of going for shortcuts, but we're really going deep when it comes to resilience. So anyway, I love that you use the word curiosity. And that's how I would answer the question of like, how do we come up with these questions is, and just praying and thinking about the time is, I just really believe God's calling us to be more curious. Like as the world is changing around us, as we really discern, how can we be resilient? How do we prepare for the future? I think part of that is God's calling us to not just ask what is happening, how do we respond to it, but really why. And so I'm praying for him to give us divine revelation into some of these things, because I think it does go deep.
I love this, Michael. And I have to say, as someone who has been in the ecosystem of ECFA for some years, I really admire and appreciate this prayerful approach that you have. I don't think you'll mind me saying that you invited some of us to come alongside, those of us on the board and others, I imagine, to be able to pray and fast and really take some time to seek God. And I find it interesting that sometimes believers who are in, whether we're running an organization, a for profit or a nonprofit, whatever, or church, right? Sometimes we have to step back and really reassess and ask ourselves those hard questions. And so when you consider the big picture of looking at the financial landscape for churches today, I'd be curious about what are you seeing that should have church leaders maybe paying closer attention?
Yeah. Again, great question. And thank you too for being a prayerful partner with the ECFA. And yeah, it's so critical. And I love that that's just folded into the spirit of this conference as well. I think for me, Rika, when I look at the data, which ECFA has you alluded to this, like a unique perspective into, as an accreditation organization with almost 2,700 members, audited financial statements. I mean, hard data, not just what are churches feeling, but like what is actually happening. Like we have access to this hard data. So whether it's reports that you're reading from ECFA, or I think these trends kind of bear themselves out even in other places, but it's essentially looks something like this. Giving is either flat, like when it comes to churches and religious organizations, it's flat, or it's just slightly outperforming inflation. And so one of my working theories as we're preparing for conference, and I'll say like, this is still baking, for me, like I'm still letting it marinate, or whatever analogy you want to use. But as I continue to think about it, I do think one of the temptations would be, relief. Like, we're keeping up. Like it's staying, above inflation, which there is something to be said for that, because the cost of everything has gotten so much more expensive. But I think there could be this temptation to rest in that and say, oh, we're keeping up, like we're hanging in there. But I think I'm really paying close attention to say what's actually happening beneath the surface of those numbers. And especially as we think about resilience, I don't think it's just about God's asking us to like survive, or like, okay, we're getting through, like we're making it. But I think there's really something that you've called us to and challenged us to in this conference to say, we're really like built to last, and implied into that is the future. So I want us just to be really careful as we're looking at data, and not just say like, wow, there's a sense of relief of like, okay, we're keeping up and we're hanging in there. But it's like, in order to really be resilient, let's again be curious, let's go deep, let's figure out not just is giving continuing to keep up with inflation, but are there things we need to take a deeper look at, to not just meet today's current needs, but also to prepare us for the future that God has in store for us.
Yeah, that's so good. And certainly you all, we want to hear you in the comments as well. What you're seeing, maybe what your church is experiencing, we would love to know. Because as you said, there is a lot of data, and you all are so great at ECFA for not only like gathering that data, but sharing that data. And so that's very helpful. But I think there is a sense that, um, you know, church is changing. We certainly often hear that, but there are many factors too, I think, behind those changes. Some of the things that we hear about, changing demographics, certainly economics, generational differences, technology, can't not mention AI, right? And even how people think about generosity. But what would you say from your vantage point? What do you believe is really driving some of the changes that we're seeing now in the church world and in faith-led organizations?
You're reading my research. As you were ticking through the list of, okay, I would affirm that economics, demographics, technology. So you hit on some of the major ones, but I think especially, I mean, this is the like church law and leadership summit. So like, let's even think about things from a spiritual standpoint. Some of the studies that are out there when it comes to what is the difference that spiritual engagement, what's the connection between spiritual engagement and generosity? Very fascinating. Some studies that are out there, and I'd love to see this confirmed in multiple places, but I'll just cite like one particular study I recall coming across. And Eureka, I think it said something like those who, when they were looking at churchgoers and looking at their level of spiritual engagement in things like, like prayer, participation in small groups, daily Bible reading, some of the things we traditionally think of, I think they found that those individuals, believers who engaged at a high level spiritually, gave almost 2 times as much. Like when you kind of think about their household giving level, if they were spiritually engaged, there's a connection there with generosity. So yes, economics are important, demographics, technology, all those things we need to take a look at. But especially because I know many of the people who are attending, participating, part of this conference are also in pastoral leadership. So I hope you'll appreciate me saying, and maybe this is even a little bit of a challenge for all of us, that giving, generosity, all of these things is really first a discipleship issue before it's an economic one. So, that's just one thing I'll add to the great list that you already suggested.
Well, we're definitely reading your research, and I appreciate that feedback. To the point of what you just shared, the heart of the giver, right? Being deeply involved in the things of God, and that being a natural giving, being a natural outpour of that. I will say a pastor, my former pastor, when I first moved to Maryland and went to law school, I was trying to find a church home. And I literally, this is back in the day when we had like maps and MapQuest, right? That world. So I'm holding that in one hand and my Bible, and I'm, trucking out of my little apartment at that time. And I thank God the Lord led me to this church. The pastor's name was Bishop James Nelson Sr. So shout out to you, Bishop Nelson. He's in, I think, his early 90s now, such a prolific leader. And he says this: you can give without loving, but you can't love without giving.
That's a good word.
It's a good word. He has so many good words, but that's one of the things that really sticks with me, and I think it shares exactly what you say. A natural outpour of the love of God is giving. For God so loved the world that he gave, right? He gave his only begotten son. So it is a natural outpour of our love, receiving God's love and us loving God and loving others to be able to give. And I've recognized that giving can feel more challenging um, in an environment where there's rising costs and other realities, right, that churches are facing and individuals are facing. So, how can leaders distinguish between simply cutting expenses and actually building the muscle of, I would say, a financially resilient church?
Yeah. Okay. I have to tag on like just one thing to the previous points that you were making, and I don't know, for whatever this is worth, this came to my mind too of just keeping in mind too, it's not about the amount, right? Like we know from scripture the example of the widow's mite, right? And so I know we all understand that, but when we think about giving and giving levels and participation and it being a discipleship issue, like God was so pleased with the way in which she gave sacrificially. So I think that's just a great challenge for all of us. So you're challenging me even on this live stream before we're on to the conference. But to your other question there about, yeah, just thinking about strategically budget, cutting expenses, financial resiliency, how do all of those things relate to one another? One of the things I've been thinking about again too, in the spirit of this conference theme, is that cutting expenses, or even let's say on the other end of the financial spectrum of like launching a giving campaign, like in some
Mm-hmm.
ways with money, you can almost simplify it. And it's like we either can potentially encourage people to like give more through a giving campaign, or we can look at cuts, like if we're trying to balance a budget. In some ways, the math just is. But I would not want us to conflate or confuse the two ideas of budget cuts with financial resilience. And that is because as I think about resilience, it's really more about, are we best positioned financially to accomplish the mission that God has called us to? And so we could actually cut areas of our budget, let's just say, going into next year where it's like, hey, we're trying to balance the budget, we're trying to reduce expenses here. But what if you're doing that in a way that's actually hurting your ability to achieve your mission next year? I would argue that you're actually cutting into resilience, or like you're taking away from resilience as opposed to supporting it. So I don't think it's just as easy as looking at things and saying, oh, we're going to make a budget cut and that makes us more financially resilient, because you can cut expenses and not be resilient. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
No, it totally does. I mean, it makes me think about even within our households, right, which is where we generate revenue, right, to give to church. It's much those same kind of budget planning. And my husband and I, are constantly revisiting the budget, right? We have a system where generally October of every year we plan the entire budget for the upcoming year, and then you have to revisit it, right, over time. And I think that's sort of what you're mentioning. You want to make sure that you first start with your vision.
Right.
Is, are we putting the money in the places that we say really reflect our heart? And then you go from there. So I really appreciate what you shared. It's amazing how quickly time goes. I want to just move us toward wrapping up with this maybe practical question. So if I don't know what you would say to a pastor or a church administrator or a finance team member or board member, right, who might be watching and wants to take that step, that one step toward greater financial resilience before the end of this year. Is there one thing that you could encourage them to do?
Yeah. So I'm going to tease, because again, we want everyone to come to the conference, right?
Yes.
So I'll tease an idea that we can unpack more when we're together here in just a couple weeks. And I'll just leave it at this. I would say, think about the idea of doing a financial resilience review. Not just a budget setting, not just the typical, like, we're going to review monthly reports or we're going to set our annual budget. But what if we step back and said, we're going to have a financial resilience review? We're going to call together the right people to come around the table and ask the questions, that you and I were just talking about earlier, which are thinking about not just at a kind of a big picture level of what's happening across the church, but like in our church or in churches like ours. But specifically, let's think about our own home church and ask those same three questions. You know, what is happening? What is driving the changes that we're seeing? And then also, how do we respond to them? So I would just suggest, a simple financial resilience review, asking those level of questions, I think is going to give us a little bit of a different perspective on how we should move forward financially than just kind of the traditional, like what you might expect. Again, no offense to the CPAs out there. I am one of you.
Yeah.
But your typical monthly financial review or annual budget setting process. But to ask those three questions, to do so prayerfully, and really in that posture of wanting to hear from the Lord. And I believe you'll have clarity that is going to lead to the kind of financial resilience that we all want to build.
Oh my gosh, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today and for giving us this preview of what I know will be a very important keynote for church leaders. I'm excited. I know that others are looking forward to it. And I really appreciate the fact that the conversation isn't just about the numbers. The numbers are important, but financial resilience is ultimately about stewardship, about wisdom, preparation, and positioning the church to fulfill its mission in the midst of change. And I think that's one of the things that makes your keynote so valuable. We're not gathering at the summit just to talk about what has changed. We also want to help church leaders understand why and what they can do about it. So if you're a pastor, church administrator, finance leader, board member, or anyone involved in the financial stewardship of your church, this is a conversation you won't want to miss. We invite you to register to be a part of the Church Lawn Leadership Summit. It takes place September 17th and 18th. It's fully online, and we've got folks signed up, hundreds of church leaders from around the nation. We want you to join us. This year's theme is "The Time Is Now, Building Resilient Churches for a Shifting World." And Michael's keynote is going to set a beautiful stage for that conversation. Again, if you haven't registered yet, make sure you secure your spot and invite your church leaders, your team members to join you. You don't want to miss the conversation or the incredible lineup of speakers and sessions we have planned. Also, if you enjoyed today's conversation and want to stay updated on future interviews and resources for your church, make sure you subscribe to the Church Attorney YouTube channel, and that link is also in the chat. Michael, again, thank you for being with us today. We are so honored to have you kicking off day one of the summit, and we can't wait to hear the full keynote. We appreciate you.
Yeah, of course. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you so much. See you all in the next one. God bless. Bye.